off, and she's playing an interview with Muhammad Ali. So Michael Parkinson's interviewing Muhammad Ali, and Muhammad Ali is talking about how white people and black people should stay separated. Now, the reason why she's using this clip is because that's what she believes. She is a segregationist, and she knows that she can appeal to black segregationists who think Muhammad Ali is cool. Matter of fact, a lot of people they'll hear this from Muhammad Ali and they'll thumbs up it, and they're into the whole segregation thing. Me personally, I am neither an integrationist or a segregationist. I'm pragmatic. I'm interested in black power, and there are issues that I have with both the integrationalists and the segregationists. So I'll let this play.
And I'm sure no intelligent white person watching this show, or no intelligent white man in his or her right white mind, want black boys and black girls marrying their white sons and daughters, and in return introducing their grandchildren as half-brown, kinky-haired black people.
I wouldn't object to that.
Well, you wouldn't, but a lot of them would.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people know.
What I'm trying to say is this. And you don't have it. You say you don't, but you don't have it. You really ain't going to have it. You're on the show, and you got to say that. But
that's not true.
Why would you want to do that?
Because I don't think I'm any different from you see.
Yeah, we're much different.
I think society's made us different.
You know we're different. We're all together.
But society's made us different.
No, not society. God made us different.
No, we're just human beings. He made all of us.
We all, listen, bluebirds fly with bluebirds, red birds want to be with red birds. Listen, tell me when I'm wrong. Pigeons want to be with pigeons.
But
tell me when I'm wrong. They don't have intelligence, but yet they stay together. We should have more intelligence than them, right?
So let's just kind of start back in the mid-20th century. The UN declared that, there's no such thing as any real genetic differences between races. All that we see is just...
The problem I have with the integrationists is a lot of them are ideologues. They're kind of radical, and they're tone deaf to just how messed up things were because of segregation, because of zoning, redlining, different laws. And I'm talking like zoning people near polluted areas, zoning people near areas where the water isn't clean. They don't understand the details in how segregation was enforced. They don't understand that, regardless of Black Wall Street, the share of the wealth was pretty much the same back then as it is now. So they overestimate the problems that came about after integration. And a lot of things did come about. There was a time during segregation, when African Americans owned an airline, they owned a baseball league. And then after integration, that was lost. So I understand that point of view. And like I said, I generally have more of a problem with the Hucklebuck integrationists. But the problem I have with the segregationists is a lot of them, it's more of an escapism thing. They would have the same amount of problems if they segregated. Matter of fact, in a lot of ways, they would be dealing with more issues because they don't really have the overall competence to operate civilization. And that's something I got into with Yvette Carnell, but that's neither here nor there. And explaining how civilization used to operate and how we need to reform the church. Another issue I have with the staunch radical segregationists is they want to segregate when money is still owed. I'm not interested in segregation when I can make a great case for reparations. Let me get paid, let's get the resources, then we can talk more about segregation. And again, that's a pragmatic thing. There may be a time if you have a product that's popping in Bulgaria, then you move your studio or your warehouse to Bulgaria just to save shipping costs. You might have a rock band where damn near all the people in the rock band are white. If you're managing them and that's your paper, you do what you got to do. So I'm all for setting up enclaves with African cultures in Africa or anywhere else. So I'm really more of a pragmatic integrationalist and more of a pragmatic segregationalist. So I can see through this plea to ignorance and the plea, and this is something you see with, unfortunately, with a lot of black YouTubers. They make a plea to what people think is cool and sounds passionate. And that's what she's doing with Muhammad Ali.
It's all just a visual
You know, that's
thing.
the first
They
thing
look
she does is she draws a
but on
Jew.
the inside, we're all exactly
And
the
she
same.
talks
They
about
kind
the
of just
UN
issued that
in the
statement,
mid-20th.
just, I guess, arbitrarily or according to the scientists that they happen to have on board at that time.
Think about that for a second. And maybe I'm reaching with the Jew, but the UN in the mid-20th century, geneticists aren't on this stuff. They have real reasons for saying what they use. Supposedly, I don't know if the UN was really saying this, but if they were saying it, they were correct. So let me show you what geneticists are really saying about race, because I see this quote quoted often. And this is kind of the go-to quote when people want to explain to the layman why geneticists don't see modern racial terms in genetics. Why would they? I mean, when you think about it, race was created before genetics, so why would it line up to something that it wasn't created to be based on? But anyway, this is a quote, and it's fairly recent. It's like 2009 from J.C. Long. And I'm going to read two of them because they're both lumped into two articles. They're both, and I see it quoted in other articles. Somebody quoted it on an Egypt search, and it was quoted in More Variation and Less Race. I think this was 2010. And there's two figures that illustrate this one right here and this one right here. And the quote says, a classification that takes into account evolutionary relationships and the nested pattern of diversity would require that sub-Saharan Africans are not a race because the most exclusive group that includes all sub-Saharan African populations also includes every non-sub-Saharan African population. Moreover, the out of Africa branch would place all Eurasians in the same race. But this would necessitate placing Europeans and Asians in sub-races. I'll let that just sink in. Yeah, because basically what they're saying is that if you are an African that encompasses all populations in Africa within their range of genetic diversity, then you would encompass those out of Africa branches too. So the Asian and Europeans on the basal level, which means you would encompass all their range of diversity. A de facto African is thereby a de facto everyone. And different geneticists have illustrated this graphically. So here's some examples graphically. And this makes sense because when you look at Africa, it's large. So you're going to have people that are divided within the continent itself. And I'll talk about this later, how some Africans are further away from other African populations than they are out of African populations genetically. And that's just because they've been isolated for 10,000 years because it's so large. There are places that are in the cut. It really is that simple.
The thing is, they hadn't even decoded the human genome by that point. So now we have decoded the human genome, and once we did that, we also went and decoded Neanderthal human genome and measuring more and more humans' genomes, and now we start to see the apparent differences. So a recent discovery, well, fairly recent in the past decade, has been that non-Africans, ironically described as modern humans by most of the press reports that released this, non-Africans interbred with Neanderthals.
This is also incorrect. And I'll get into why later on. Okay? I know you've heard it. I know you've heard it, and you're like, what? But I heard, hey, I'm going to show you why it's incorrect, because there's so many logical proofs you can run on it, and that's just you. You can do your own research, and you're going to come up with the same thing.
So
all you can do is cite somebody. I'm going to tell you that the people you're citing are getting things wrong. I'm going to show you in a minute. Actually, that's not true.
That's kind of like the equivalent of having a great grandfather who was a Neanderthal, right? So we have Neanderthal DNA. Neanderthals had larger brain capacity. They had different body build. They had different immune systems. According to many of the depictions that I've seen, they had fair skin, fair hair, blue eyes, and they split off from our common ancestor with Africans 500,000 years ago.
Actually, that's not true too, because European, well, she might. I mean, if she's from Iceland or something, but she sounds like she's from Britain. But Europeans don't have no 4 to 5. That's kind of an oddity. The one thing about this is she's consistently wrong about everything. I'm, and that's why I did this. Now, the larger brain capacity thing, that may be true. Although it also might be you need a heck of a dome to deal with that brow ridge and that jaw. You need like some counterbalance. You see what I'm saying? Because if you don't have something to support that brow ridge, if somebody slaps you in the top of the head, it's gonna rip your skin open. So, but that's, like I said, I'll get to the evidence that they did not breed with Neanderthals. And another thing she said that was wrong is the Neanderthals tested so far were melanated. They were not albino Neanderthals. They were dark-skinned based on the pigment genes being like dark-skinned people today. I'm just telling you how it is. She's consistently wrong about shit. The brain capacity thing might be true though, but like I said, you're gonna need a hell of a counterbalance for that brow ridge because it's cold. You know what I mean? That's a cold brow ridge.
And were considered to be a different species until they realized that they'd interbred with us. But you can still reasonably consider them to be a different species, because, for example, we consider polar bears and grizzly bears to be different species, yet they're able to interbreed to produce offspring that are fertile. So, and they split off about 100,000 years ago. So it's very reasonable to consider that Neanderthals were a separate species from Africans. And anyway, so yes, our ancestors interbred with Neanderthals, so we are effectively a hybridized species. Non-Africans are hybridized with Neanderthals. So that in itself makes us different from sub-Saharan Africans, blatantly. And it's actually, I watched one of the first press reports on this, it's actually on YouTube, and, I was just researching and I watched it, and the guy's face, the scientist's face who discovered this.
But let me just get to something real quick. See, this fella from 23andMe, and he told me about this. I took his name out, though, because, I want to give him some privacy. But he told me about this. He said, man, I'm 98% sub-Saharan African, and it say I got 58 Neanderthal variants. And I'm like, okay. And, that seemed kind of high, even though that really isn't that high. That's like that's like 0.25. You know what I mean? That's not really that high. I got more than that. But then D'Angelo, I gave him a little privacy. Well, actually, he didn't care, but I took his last name out. As you can see, D'Angelo is 15.8% European, and he has 48 Neanderthal variants. So that shows right there, and it really is mathematically impossible, but homeboy from Burundi, he didn't get those Neanderthal variants from anything but Africans. So that right there shows you that Africans have Neanderthal variants. Not all of them, but some of them do. And they're not getting them from anyone but other Africans. So does that mean Neanderthals are in Africa? Now, remember, shared ancestor. Okay. Let me show you. See, look at this. This one right here. Look how small that little arm is. Okay? Now just look at that. Now I want to show you something. Now you see this is Motorman. Look at Motorman. Look at modern Ethiopia. Look at modern Ethiopia where you got Motorman from like 4000 BC. And when he was tested, it came out that ancient DNA reveals into Africa migration. Like people are coming into Africa. And in that report, it said that sub-Saharan Africans have as much as 0.3 to 0.7 Neanderthal ancestry. And we just hadn't said this, but now we know where it came from. Okay? This is like, I forget the people that did this study. I think it was a Brazilian team, but they end up getting something wrong. And see, you see error found in study of first African genome. Okay? And this is what they got wrong. They thought were out of Africa genes coming back in were just African genes. They didn't find that. See, it said that they inherited Neanderthal from Eurasians in that group, and blogs reported this too. What if those genes, like I said, shared ancestor, were in Africans all along? What would happen to them? And there's two things: time and diversity. Those two things is what happened to them. Now look at the map again, and I want you to look kind of in the middle of Europe. Look for OS, like OACE. This dude, 35,000 years ago, and he had 6 through 8%, 6 through 9% Neanderthal ancestry. And interesting, it says that even though he's found in Europe, that he was an ancestor to East Asians and Native Americans. East Asians and Native Americans tend to have the most Neanderthal ancestry, but none of them have 6 to 9%. So what you see is that time reduces the Neanderthal variance. And this is understandable because favorable mutations will replace the ones that aren't as favorable. I'll use the politically correct term. Favorable fluctuations they'll go through that survival of the fittest test. So they're more likely to maintain if they're favorable. If it's shared ancestor, then you have something that'll probably help you out more with the cold, because there are different places in Africa that get you cold, and they left anyway. So these type of variants are more likely to be selectable in natural selection, to stick. So that's another factor. But the other factor why they stick in these out of Africa populations is, if you look back at this illustration, look at how it illustrates African diversity. These are all African populations. In that little pip, that's like, for example, if you look at your hand, okay, you take away your pinky finger, the rest of your hand is African diversity. And when you look at it like that, then it should make more sense. You combine time and diversity, and well, let me show you. Like, if you look at this map, this is Denisovans. The colors, light colors, and in this map with Neanderthals, those colors, that's where like the red, the yellow, the light blue, that's where you have the highest percentage of Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA. Genes, I should say, or either or. So if you notice, it's the furthest you get from Africa. It's not where Neanderthals lived, because if it was where they lived, then it would peak in Europe, it would peak in Central Europe, in that area. But that's not what happens. It peaks in the islands. Now, were Neanderthals surfing? Were they in the islands? It peaks way out in Canada, where you see the red and the orange. And you notice how it's just arrayed, so it goes up the further you get away from Africa. And look, let me give you another source. It shows that Melanesians have the highest percentage of archaic. That's Neanderthal and Denisovan. So why is this? And the reason why is the founder's effect. When diversity decreases, when you take away that hand and you replace it with the pinky, you lose all that diversity all across the hand. And you just have it in that area. And if that area, because it's closer to a common ancestor, has more Neanderthal, then it becomes a higher percentage of Neanderthal. And the more it spreads, the higher that percentage goes, because it loses diversity around it. As you can see, like, you go to Iceland, that's where you have the highest And then like even below that, up where Norway and Denmark meet in the highest point of Europe, that's where you have the highest, not necessarily where Neanderthals live. Because why would they go up there? They already, it's already cold. Why go, to the end of the world? So that's not where they lived. But that's where you have the least amount of human diversity. And another example, here's a story, and this is from the Max Planck Institute. And this is why I say y'all got to watch the Max Planck Institute. And y'all use them as a source too liberally. They get stuff wrong. And this is one area where they really got something wrong to the point where it's funny. They tested a 50,000-year-old Neanderthal toe, and let me quote this from this article. New analysis of her genome has found that this so-called Altai Neanderthal inherited DNA from modern humans from Africa, including a gene that may have involved speech. And then there's another quote from somebody from the Max Planck Institute. He says, this is the first genetic evidence that early modern humans met Neanderthals and bred with them earlier than we thought. His name is Sergei Castellano, an evolutionary biologist at the Max Planck Institute. Sergei is wrong. He's wrong because this is a they're finding common ancestor in this Neanderthal, and now they're trying to push back the time in which they bred with them to a point that's beyond out of Africa, which is already shrinking for other reasons. But that's a different subject. So, and really, do you think humans brought a gene to give them speech? They didn't get this from, they said humans, I think, or AMH, genetically modern humans. You really think Africans came and gave them a gene so they could speak? How? That's what I mean. Something is wrong with the Max Planck Institute. And I know you're probably asking, like, why is it everybody gets this? Why are you the only person that knows this? And good question. Why am I the only person? And I asked that same question, and I realized or found out that I'm not. That the truth is out there and people are just ignoring it. The University of Cambridge did a study, and they reached the same conclusion that I reached with independent research. And I'm just going to read their conclusion, because their conclusion is kind of long, but I'll try to read it crisply. It's a few paragraphs. It says, the scientists found that common ancestry without any hybridization explains the genetic similarities between Neanderthals and modern humans. In other words, the DNA that Neanderthal and modern humans share can all be attributed to their common origin, without any recent influx of Neanderthal DNA into modern humans. Isn't that exactly what I just said? The research had simulated a large number of populations representing Africa and Eurasia over the last 500,000 years and estimated how much similarity would be expected between a random Neanderthal individual and modern humans in Africa and Eurasia. The scientists concluded that when modern humans expanded out of Africa 60 to 70,000 years ago, they would have brought out that additional genetic similarity with them, making Europeans and Asians more similar to Neanderthals than Africans are on average, undermining the theory that hybridization and not common ancestry explain these differences. See, they ran the numbers. It's not just me. I reject what Tara McCarthy is saying, and I know this is common science. I don't even know if I know it's not consensus science, because this shows it right here. They ran the numbers on the theory that I just presented, and they came to the same conclusions. University of Cambridge. So it's obviously not consensus, but I know it's popular, and let me tell you, it's wrong. They're getting it wrong. So I reject her storyboard tracings. Africans did not breed with Neanderthals. There is no evidence of it that goes beyond shared ancestry. Run the numbers. This is shared ancestry. Now it really starts to get pseudo.
More recently, is that some Central Africans, and this is where the black slaves were taken from in West Africa, they actually hybridized, they mated 35,000 years ago. They mated with another species that split off from our common ancestor 700,000 years ago within Africa. So, and honestly, like this other species looks like a hairless gorilla that can walk on its hind legs, basically. So, just to be frank, I mean, they hybridized with a completely different species to what we hybridized with. So, arguably, you know, we could arguably be considered different species. This is not to mention the amount of separate evolution that we've gone through individually, away from them. And but we are definitely, by any standard of
Sounds
the
like
imagination,
she's kind
different
of
subspecies.
like she knows she's bullshitting. She's like, "Hi, and we're different subspecies because 30,000 years ago." She draws a picture of Homo erectus. Homo erectus was extinct then, 30,000 years ago. He ain't been around for a while. So and if you don't know, why are you picking something? And then you're talking about how it looks. Like, you notice she kind of did that stutter lie, because that's the lie right there. She picked how it looked while saying she doesn't know how it looked, then talked about how it looked. Man, I hope some of y'all stupid ass Hotep Nation dudes, I know y'all, you dig your alt-right women, but if y'all missing this stuff, man, I hope they laughing at you, because it's funny. I'm gonna laugh at you. I'm a clown. And then, like, we don't know how Neanderthals look. They could have looked like this. This is a depiction of a Neanderthal based on the huge eyes and the width of the nose and the mouth. And we don't know how hairy they are. We do know they were dark skinned. I don't know if they was this black. That's a black ass Neanderthal, but. So if we're going to get technical, we don't know what they look like. We don't know what color their teeth were. But I will say this. What you're seeing with this unknown archaic is probably just African diversity, because 30,000 years ago is past the period of anatomically, that's a hard word to say, modern human. So if you're messing with somebody, it's probably what you had with the new Adam, where it was a dude from, I think it was someplace in the South. He got a DNA test and he had a haplogroup that was older than anybody. So I was like, damn, we got a new Adam in this bitch. So the human race gets older. Well, the human race is already older than Homo-Sapiens get older, put it like that. So he made Homo-Sapiens older. And then people were like, well, shoot, you look like you're related to people from the Cameroon. Kind of looks like this tribe. So they went out and started testing people, and they found a tribe, man. Like, they said, hey, this is Adam's tribe, new Adam's tribe, the Imbo people. That's probably where these mysterious genes were coming from 35,000 years ago. Because if that tribe was isolated, those lineages were found with genes that could easily been mistaken for archaic if it split 35,000 years ago. This is old African, old West African. 35,000 years ago, they would be split because it wasn't as many people in West Africa back then. That's not really the heartlands. That might be the motherlands of Africa, the new motherlands. It might be moving to the West, but it wasn't the genetic heartland. So being split for 35,000 years, that makes some sense. Being in, with Imbo people. So if you would see those genes, you would mistake them for archaic. And I think that's what's probably going on. But even if that's not what's going on, how would they even know when they don't know it? So they couldn't sequence it. So they don't have the archaic genome of whatever split from, she said, some 700,000 years ago. They don't know it. So how could they test it? So it's basically fluff. It's questionable science. I wonder, because I know what she's referring to, and if you don't know it, you can't test it. So how do you know it's just not more genes that you haven't seen before from a lineage that you haven't seen before? Now notice what she's saying here. Listen to what she's saying.
I think that's perfectly reasonable. I've tried coaxing this out of a few different scientists, and they tend to just kind of, silently give a nod of the head without actually saying it, because it's so unpolitically correct that you just can't say, look, there are different subspecies here. But I thought it was particularly funny. There's this guy on Twitter I'm following, he's a Chinese guy, and every now and again he tweets, Chinese women, do not mate with other species.
Went from talking about what geneticists think but can't say to what somebody she follows on Twitter, like some insecure Chinese dude who's like, do not mate with other men, give me some pussy now. Like, come on, man.
It ruins integrity of Chinese species. So I think that the Chinese, and I think there are actually studies showing this when surveying Chinese anthropologists and things, the Chinese certainly recognize the genetic reality of race. Race is literally just a euphemism for the scientific term subspecies. So yes, we are multiple different subspecies, and some of the subspecies are further away from each other genetically than others. And we can definitely say there is a bigger gap between sub-Saharan Africans and any non-African population than between any non-African populations. For example, Chinese and Europeans are actually far, far more similar genetically than Europeans and sub-Saharan Africans or Chinese and sub-Saharan Africans.
And bullshit. No, at the K=2 level, Chinese and mainly East Asians, and it's different. Like if you look at one African population, let me say this first. Eastern Europeans are closer to Asians. Western Europeans are closer to Africans. Europe in general is closer to Africans. Asia in general is closer to Africans. So if you break up populations of Japanese and you have Africa as one population, then that population is going to be closer to individual populations of Japanese and further away from European. However, the Europe will be closer to Africa, as you can see, than most individual populations of Asia, of East Asians. And this, you can see right here, it has African populations split up where Biaka pygmies, Mbudi pygmies, and you can see all these African populations. When you just divide them up into populations, they are closer to Europeans than the Asian populations. And the Asian populations, the East Asian populations, are closer to Africans than they are Europeans. So she's wrong completely. And here's another example where, and this is a bunch of fringe African populations, like more isolated populations like Khoisan in South Africa. They're further away from other Africans than they are out of African populations. And you can see that in this, because these are all African populations. But if you look at it after the K=2, when you, I think they have French over there in the red, you start having people that have more of the red, even at, K=2, but even on down, than they do the other colors. Like that red still shows up. So they're still, even at different levels, they're related to people who are out of Africa. Let me show you. Ethiohalix ran Ancestry of almost 3,000 people. This is a blog. They ran it through Admixture, which is a program, and they isolated African origins versus out of Africa migration. If you look at the results, most Europeans had like more than a quarter recent African ancestry. So you look at some of the populations tested. I won't scroll down. I'll just show you some stills. Russians are 25% recent African. Spaniards are 29% recent African. Northern Europeans, 28. French, 28. Iranians, 31. Mexicans, 19. It's geography. They're closer, and that's really it. And it makes sense. And like if you get to the bottom, you get to the places that are further away, like Eastern Asian, and they have no, a lot of them are all red. They have no recent African ancestry. They're that distant. And remember, those are the locations that have the highest percent of Neanderthal because of the founder's effect. Less intradiversity. Probably more interdiversity, but that's a different thing. Intradiversity is worldwide comparison diversity, not just within your group, but overall. They have less of that, so they have a higher percentage of archaic, what we call archaic. Now, and it makes sense with Europeans. Like if you look at this picture, can you find the African in this picture? See, that's African diversity. Her name is Moran Binti. See, I don't want to call her an albino, because if I'm going to call her an albino, I'm going to have to call all blondes with her complexion albinos. And YouTube don't want me doing that. They say it does stop. Don't do that. It's bad. And I'm like, YouTube, come on, man. You got racist stuff like this.
So sub-Saharan Africans are really the most separate group genetically from all other humans, and that's probably because they didn't interbreed with the same Neanderthals that we interbred with, and they actually interbred with a completely different hominid species that doesn't even have a name yet.
People out there in our nation don't have maps, and I believe that our education, like such as in South Africa and the Iraq, everywhere like such as, and I believe that they should, our education over here in the U.S. should help the U.S.